Thank you for joining me, guys. And I know this is being recorded, so if anyone's catching up with it on the Be Bold YouTube channel, then welcome, and thank you very much for giving me the time. So this has been something I've been working on for a while, and I was really lucky to be asked after SHP to go and work with Dret and a few other mats, to be able to work with the history leads there, and that's when I met Harriet, and then it's led to Be Bold. So this has really been a bit of a progression, a bit of a journey for me, sharing my own experience with developing writing as a teacher, some of the things that I've read, etc., etc. So really going to take us through that, and it really is captured in this title, Life Beyond the Venerable Bede. And it's obviously a play on the Venerable Bede, because he's got that obviously unassailable position within Anglo-Saxon England. So similarly, Bede is like that within our classrooms, or the PEE variants. We saw Gareth before mentioned Peel. They're used so often in our classrooms. And today's really about asking questions about writing frames. And I think for a few of us, we might want to move beyond writing frames, but might not know what to move to. And I'm also going to argue for reacquainting reading, thinking, and writing, and which is why I linked back to Chris's point before, thinking aloud. I thought was really good, and I think Chris sort of like paraphrased it or quoted it, which suggests he's picked it up from some reading he's done himself, and it's a phrase I'll definitely come back to today. So that's the sort of in a nutshell why the title's there, and also why it says SHP. If anyone would like to follow me on Twitter, please do. Drop me a message about the session, the bits that you like, the bits that you didn't agree with, particularly. I really like those bits too. And I'll make a quick start. So just want to set my stall out, really. I'm not a writing expert, so this is not CPD. I don't want loads of the attendees then I'll just drop off the register and say, no, I'm not being here if you're not an expert. But I'm not a writing expert. I'm just a teacher that's been working on this for a while now. I'm not going to try and sell you an approach today. I don't think there is a one-way approach to writing in the classroom. This isn't a recipe for exam success or to impress Ofsted inspectors, but I will say that my progress rate has always been high and positive, and a couple of times I've been mentioned in Ofsted, or my department's been mentioned within Ofsted reports. So these types of strategies can impress Ofsted inspectors, although I'm not sure we really need to focus on that as an objective. And they do contribute to exam success, although this isn't about trying to improve your exam results. And this one's probably the most important one, really, which is this isn't a perfect representation of other people's ideas. I'm going to mention some absolute giants in my own, well, within our subject community, but also within my own development. And this is really a reflection of what I took away from their work, rather than me saying this is what they have said. That's really important to say, that it's basically how I implemented their ideas, not a perfect representation of their ideas. So then what is it? It's my current thinking on writing, although my work's always in draft. I'm currently writing a dissertation, another one on historical writing and our beliefs in the classroom. And I imagine by the time I finish that, which it feels really far in the future, I will have added a few more slides to this presentation. So my work's always in draft. I don't think this is the finished article yet. It's some of the best things really of what I've read, and the things that really helped me to try new things in the classroom that have had a positive impact on kids, whether that's progress 8 or their confidence or just my own feeling about their historical writing. And then in bold here, an attempt to pull more teachers into the conversation about developing writing. I think the history community is absolutely smashing it at the minute to do with curriculum. I think we lead the way. I think we've really shaped how other subjects, maybe this is a bold claim, but be bold, so I'm just going to say it anyway. I think we've really helped other subjects shape their discussions about curriculum. But there's still one thing that sort of pulls at me a little bit, which is we have these incredible curriculums and these amazing inquiry questions, and we're really thinking hard about curriculum. And then in the last 10 minutes of the lesson, we ask students to sort of fit their writing into a writing frame that maybe hasn't had as much thought as the curriculums that we're teaching. And obviously the curriculum is more important than any sort of writing strategy. The curriculum is the way the students are going to make progress in history. But if they're making that progress, we've got to think carefully about how they communicate that. And actually the writing process is going to support students to get the most out of the curriculum as a formative process. So what I want to do is try and pull more people into this discussion about developing writing, and sort of show you some of the mistakes I've made along the way, to see if I can sort of kickstart more people talking about this type of thing. Okay, so first giant within the community, or definitely within my thinking anyway, although I've not read all of his work yet. I've still got that to look forward to. And I really mean that, because he's helping shape a lot of my thinking on my dissertation, is Dr. Jim Carroll. And I don't know if anyone knows the phrase, which is like, I feel like I've been seen. If you're not familiar with the phrase, it essentially means when someone writes something that isn't about you and they've never met you, yet it feels like they're describing you perfectly. And what Jim said was in his work, Dr. Jim Carroll, was that within the history community, those that haven't been able to access the long tradition of reading and writing on the topic of teaching history, and in the magazine Teaching History from the HA, sometimes have like epiphanies about writing, where they realize that reductive and formulaic writing strategies aren't really doing what you want them to do. So you then go in search and sort of like come up with your own ideas of how you're going to change writing, and you feel like it's groundbreaking. You must be the first person that's thought this, because so many people use writing frames on Twitter and in the community in our classrooms and schools that is groundbreaking. And I definitely went through that moment where I thought, right, I'm going to change the world with my thoughts here, and really realize that I'd only just scratched the surface of something that's been discussed for a long time. And the discussion's really taking place within the subject community and within a particular place, which is the History Teachers Extended Writing Movement. Now, within Jim's work, he says no one's going to put their hand up and say, listen, I'm part of the HTEWM movement. But we can see a movement within teaching history articles and writing about teaching how we teach history, where there has been an encouragement to think really carefully about our subject, to think carefully about what it means to write historically. What does causal reasoning look like? What things should we avoid? What things should we build in? How do we get kids to think carefully about it? But not just causal reasoning, but consequential reasoning, evidential thinking, all the things we do in the classroom with kids and all the things that historians do. On the other side of the debate is the genre theory, which is the idea that very few students are going to go on to do a degree in history. Some might do A-level, a few more might do a GCSE, but most schools are roughly split, like 50% of the kids do history, or a bit less, bit more, whatever. So lots of the kids we teach in year 7, 8, and 9 aren't going to do history at GCSE, even fewer of them in A-level, even fewer at degree, very few of them go on to be historians. So the argument is that we can teach our subjects really well for as long as the kids are engaging with it. And what we could do is contribute to wider goals, wider writing goals, like writing reports, writing analytically, writing evaluations, writing narratives, writing letters. And if we teach our subjects really well, but then contribute to students developing these wider writing goals, then we're able to teach our subject well and also support students to develop in ways that might be more useful in their futures if they're not going to be historians, which most of them won't be. So this is really helps us frame the debate. We've got the subject community really pushing for a specific group within the subject community, particularly in teaching history, that's really pushing for us to think carefully about what it means to write about history. Even though they acknowledge that not everyone's going to be a historian or go on to do A-level, but even whilst we've got them, we should be focusing on what does it mean to study history and to write about history. And on the other side of the debate, broadly, teach history and contribute to these wider writing goals. And you might find yourself on either side of this debate. For myself, I feel like I started more towards the left and moved towards the right, and I don't use left and right in terms of any political persuasion or whatever. I just mean as on my screen right now. So Jim's really framed this debate for us, which was really useful for me. And I started to think about my early career, like why did I start off on the left, or what happened in my early career? And this is what I was talking about with Harriet before. I remember getting my first job. I was super lucky to get my first job, and I went in over the summer holidays, spent a fortune, money I really didn't have as a trainee teacher, to get all this stuff I was going to decorate my classroom with. And I met my head of department over the summer, and she took me into my classroom. I was so excited to decorate this room with green carpet and pink walls. And she showed me all these display boards, and she said, these display boards are yours. Do with them what you want. Do anything you want with this room. But just don't change this one display. It was on the left-hand side of my classroom, just near where the door was. And on this display was a sandwich and a burger. And she explained to me that the department policy was to use the burger writing frame. And the sandwich was even better because the exam board that we used at the time had suggested using the BLT approach. And I'm going to be honest, I looked at it and thought it was class. And I thought, yes, I'm going to be so cool because I'm going to teach kids to write about history using burgers and sandwiches, and they're going to get it. And it's going to be really relatable, and it's going to be such a good explanation of what they need to do. It agrees with what my mentor told me to do on my training year. And actually, as a kid at school, I was taught PE too. This is great. So left it alone on the wall. NQT year rolls on. By the time I'd managed to get on top of everything else you need to do as a trainee, I started to realize that what the kids were actually writing wasn't really what I wanted them to write. Wasn't very good. It all seemed very the same. It seemed like they were focusing on paragraphs that only had 3 sentences because it was PEE or BLT or whatever. And I thought, I know what I need to do. I need to make a more complex, more sophisticated writing frame because I need to improve the quality of the work. And I wonder whether at the time, me and my head of department might have come up with something that looks like this really complicated burger. And I honestly think as an NQT, if I'd have seen this, I probably would have put it on the wall or printed out and glued it in the books or something like that. Because I was desperate. I was really desperately trying to think about ways to get the kids to write better paragraphs. And I thought, if I take these writing frames away, they're going to really struggle. But my current writing frames aren't good enough. Now, it's a tongue-in-cheek moment because I didn't actually show this to the kids. I didn't know it existed. But you can see here, I got this off Google. This teacher must have been feeling the same way as me. Now, I do feel like whoever created this probably also had their tongue-in-cheek thing. I'm going to make it quite fun and funny. But still, this is obviously had some thought into it. If you look at some of the things that are on here, it says topic sentence, which is a way of starting lots of different paragraphs and writing frames. You can see here it mentions put in your thesis statement. Someone's really thought carefully about this. And they're not the only ones, because so many teachers have tried to move away from PE because it just wasn't good enough. It just didn't get exactly what they needed from the kids. So many teachers out there have tried to create new writing frames, new acronyms to support children to improve their writing. But far from being the solution, I actually think this is a symptom of the problem. I think that so many teachers are having to come up with lots of different writing frames because the writing frames aren't doing what we want them to. And instead of coming up with new ones, I think we need to question whether they should be there at all. Because when we actually, and you'll have all had similar experiences to me, when we actually play out the implementation of these writing frames in the classroom, it becomes quite problematic for a few reasons. And I'll note a few of them now. PEED or PEAL or any of the P varieties can support students to analyse, and it can support them to explain themselves and provide evidence of what they're saying. It can do that. But when it comes to source analysis, PE doesn't really do it. If we stick with PE, it's because we don't really want to show an exception to the rule. So instead we use things like NOP, which is nature, origin, purpose, something we're probably all familiar with, or WWW, or any of the other varieties of writing frames. People, SWOOP was one I've seen before. Say what you see, own knowledge, provenance. Now, even on that one, when I saw students implement this, it started to encourage students to write things like, from my own knowledge, I know, which for me is a massive bugbear. Like, don't say from my own knowledge, I know. That's not how we write in history. So these writing frames that we tried to create to help contributed to the problem. So that's explanation and it's source analysis. But what about when we deal with interpretations? Or what about longer essays where they need to make a judgment with sustained reasoning? And I'm using the exam board language here. So what's ended up happening is lots of students, and I've seen it, and worse than that, I've done it myself. I've said to students, well, what you need to do is on question 1, go in, just answer the question. It's only 4 marks. And question 2, it's 8 marks. So use a PE paragraph. And then when you get to the source, use not. But then when you get to interpretations, just remember, use the words in the question. And before you know it, this strategy that was supposed to support students with their memory and concentration is actually contributing to their cognitive overload. Their working memories are being used up, concentrating on which writing frame they should use. And it creates an incredibly high-risk situation, because if they choose not on an explanation question, they're not going to get many marks. They're going to really struggle. So we just created a high-risk situation where we might be contributing to students' struggles rather than helping them tackle them. And then we think about, if anyone's ever worked in a senior leadership role, you go around the school, every single department's got their own different writing frames and acronyms. So now you don't just have to remember them for history, but for geography, for RE, for English, for science, for all the different, although lots of science teachers tell me over the years they hate writing frames because you can just write in bullet points anyway, so you don't even need to write an essay. So that was me as a literacy coordinator trying to work with my science team, and they were telling me all the things I should have listened to, which is I need a subject-specific way to deal with this, and I should have listened back then too. So this is a bit of a problem, the writing frame situation for children. There's too many of them. Final one to just chuck in there is lots of teachers, unless the head of department's really got on top of it and said, this is the way that we're going to do it, teachers have different writing frames. So if you spent year 7 teaching one writing frame, and then the classes get flipped in year 8, which happens all the time because timetabling is difficult, kids can then get taught completely differently. Or if the head of department leaves and a new head of department comes in, changes the writing frame, it's really difficult for us to say that students are making progress if we're constantly changing the writing frame or having to add letters to the writing frame to try and make the answer better. So for me, we need a way to move beyond writing frames. And I started to think, why did I use them? So right now I'm convinced that we shouldn't use them. But why did I use them? Why did my team never tell me that I was wrong and we shouldn't use them? And I think it's partly to do with the way we explain, or the way that lesson planning was explained to me. When I was training to teach, I was told that lessons have 4 sections. And this is better than the old way, because it used to just be a starter, a main, and a plenary. This is better. It's a review, an activate, demonstrate, and a consolidate. And I'm not saying that that's not a good way to think about a lesson. I'm sure a very good lesson would have those 4 things within it. But because I saw these as 4 discrete, separate sections of my lesson, and my team did, and the school did, I think what we started to do was to see that each part of the lesson had like a work object, a curricular object within that 15 minutes that children had to complete, and the work had to be done before we could move on. And we'd use AFL to check they'd done the work before we moved on. So a retrieval grid, the colourful ones with all the different numbers and point score system, and you say, right, you've got to get 15 marks or whatever, and the kids do it. That's completed. So now we move on to the activate. And today we get some new vocabulary, and we were a pixel school. So the Freya model, we're going to use the Freya model or pixel and lock. And the product of that, the outcome, the object is a completed detailed Freya model thing. Then we went on to the demonstrate, and we had to use a think hard worksheet. And again, I was looking to see if it was completed. And by the time that we get to the consolidate, kids have probably learned some stuff, but whether it's got that really thorough curricular thinking that plans backwards and incrementally takes them through really complex ideas and subject matter, so that by the time they get to the writing, they have something to say and they've started to shape an argument. I'm not sure that was there for when I was planning lessons like this. So what myself and my team needed was an over scaffolded writing frame to be able to help the kids make sense of everything they'd just done, which was a lot of work, and start writing a paragraph. And this particularly became high risk because of work scrutiny, because our work scrutiny was telling us that they wanted more and more writing in the books because that was high challenge and you've got good results, so let's make them even better by making them write more. And that work has to be better. So it's got to be longer and better. And the only way that we could think to do that was to create writing frames, because we hadn't really thought carefully about what the kids are actually doing. We were thinking about what work they had to do. And there's a massive difference between what kids are learning and what work they are doing, in my opinion. So we tried to boil it down and think really carefully at what do we do when we teach history. We think, we write, we read, and then throughout the whole thing, we speak about our ideas. And then after working with Ollie Cavan and David Goodwin, I started to think we draw as well. And I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I've just thrown it in there for good measure. We draw to help us shape our ideas. Now, it's really interesting, again, thinking about this idea of writing like a historian, because once I got rid of the burger off the display, I replaced it with write like a historian. And again, Jim Carroll, I felt like I was seeing within, I don't know if it's the same piece of work or a different piece of work, he wrote, what do you even mean by write like a historian? Because the first question he asked was, well, which historian? Because every historian writes differently. Everyone's got a different inquiry. Everybody's got a different style. Everybody's looked at different sources. There are so many different types of history. What do we actually mean by write like a historian? It's even harder when we think, why are we trying to get 11-year-olds to write like a historian? What we're really trying to do is get year 7s, 8s, 9s, whatever year it is, to write historically about their ideas, about what they've thought about. So that's why on this diagram, the thinking is privileged. It's the top, it's above the others. We should always think carefully about their thinking. And I think we're doing a lot of work on this. The curricular thinking that's going on is really great within the history community. But now we need to reacquaint that with reading and writing, in my opinion, and maybe stop thinking about writing like a historian and start thinking, what do we actually mean by writing historically or writing in the history classroom? So it's been a lot of me talking at this point, and I know it's a webinar, so I can't take answers, but I do want you guys to take a little chance to have a breather from me speaking and have a little think. So if we're going to prioritize historical thought in the classroom, going back to Chris's point in the chat about thinking aloud to kids and to prioritizing historical thought, absolutely agree. If we're going to do that and then get them to write, we've got to think carefully about what students struggle with specifically when they study history. What is it they specifically struggle with? So if you've got a piece of paper in front of you or your phone or nothing, just have a quick think now. What specifically do kids struggle with when they write historically? And once you've had a think, I'm going to put the 5 things that Christine Council suggests they struggle with. And it absolutely changed the way I saw my own classroom, not just in the last 15-minute consolidate, but my entire practice, the curriculum, everything. So hopefully it'll have the same effect for you guys. So I'll shut up now. I'll say like 1 minute or so. That's going to feel like ages because everything will be silent. But 1 minute, have a quick think, the types of things students struggle with when they write historically.
Hi John, I will jump in here to make that minute absolutely fly by. So I know that you've got people to jot things down on paper, but if you want to share in the chat, then obviously I can feed back to John. So I'll just start off with something which our students struggle with, and I think we talked about this briefly before, didn't we? Actually picking up the pen and writing something down is something which I find for some students quite a bit of a battle at the moment, and we sort of talked about the fact that they find writing quite scary and quite difficult already, so asking them to do something which they're not particularly comfortable with, so those are my thoughts. We've got Helen in the chat. Evening, Helen. Having the confidence to understand what they know.
Wow, just say that to me again.
Having the confidence to understand what they know.
That's a really top-end curricular question. How do they understand what they know? That's really cool. Yeah, absolutely.
We've also got from Gareth, starting writing, so a little bit like what I said, where to use historical knowledge, thinking, writing like an expert.
Just read that one to me again.
Starting writing, number 1.
Yeah.
2, where to use historical knowledge,
yeah,
thinking, writing like an expert.
Yeah.
There's loads coming in now, sorry, the chat is flying up and down. Right, I'm just going to go back to Suzanne Powell, who says organising writing,
yeah,
recalling knowledge from a range of lessons.
Yeah.
James says sentence construction.
Love it.
Back to Chris again. He says organising point sentence. It's all well and good. It's all well and good, but that is often the hardest bit, organising what Christine Council called the small points into big points.
Love it.
Becky says organisation of ideas in the head, i.e. categorising, prioritising.
Yeah.
And Gareth, just to clarify, says, by this I mean how to write the knowledge they have to back up their points,
Yeah, perfect. That's great, guys. Thank you so much. I think I can't remember how many responses we got at DRET, Harriet, but I think people contributed a load of great ideas there. Clearly, some people have been shaped by Christine's ideas already, and that point about little ideas and big ideas is one of the ones I'm going to put on in a second. But just whilst they're in my head, because by the time I start speaking again, I'll probably forgot some of the great things that people have said there. I love that curricular question about how children understand what they know. That's a great question, but probably not one I can answer. You definitely need someone who's more skilled with the philosophical questions that go behind curricular design there. But I think that's a great question. I get that the idea about students struggling to pick up the pen. I've got a few ideas on this one. One of my ideas is that there comes a point where we stop using scaffolds as much because we just think, come on now, you're in year 9, I need to stop giving you all this support. I'm spoon feeding you. This new generation of children aren't resilient enough. They're too dependent on us. It must be mobile phones' faults or games or whatever. And you know what all that type of stuff we say in the staff room. My opinion of my own practice is that because I over scaffolded everything in year 7 and 8, by the time I started to take the scaffolds away, they completely lacked confidence because all of their confidence was rooted and all sort of like twisted up with the use of a writing frame. And when I took them away, it was like the fallout of a war. Just boom, what are you doing to me? How dare you take that writing frame away from me? That's partly my fault. They became over-reliant on the support that I was giving them. So my long-term answer would be the less support over scaffolding you do, the less likely they are to fall apart when you take it away. Instead, maybe we need to think out loud, model more, fade backwards. That would be my answer to that one. My other one is having really clear, I've just been writing actually a book hopefully that's coming out soon, working with a load of cool history teachers out there, really great history teachers. And one of the things I wrote about was writing routines, having a really clear writing routine where you've got 4 or 5 things you always do before kids start writing. So if it's about picking the pen up, because picking the pen up probably won't feature in this next 5 bullet points. So what I always did was I had a writing routine. I reminded them what the inquiry question was. We broke that question down. We looked within our books and I asked them, when you start to struggle, when you have writer's block, so I'm trying to normalize their struggle, where can you look for help? And they said, the model answer you gave us 2 lessons ago, the key word bank that we created last lesson, the card sort diagram that we put in our books where we start to shape our thinking. So they're really engaging with what do I have in my book or in the classroom to help me, the display board where you've got some ideas up there, whatever. So if it's about picking the pen up, one of my best ideas is to have a writing routine. The other one is if the kids are struggling to pick their pen up, you might want to return, that might be an indication that, like my compartmentalized lesson before, that you need to actually return to the thinking, not the writing. Maybe it's about going back to the diagram you created with them, or the card sort that you did with them, or the chart that you filled out with them, and actually getting them to fully understand what's happening there. Because like I did, if I see the work outcome of the Activate, whatever it is a think hard worksheet or a chart or whatever, has that actually prioritized the thinking I want these kids to do? So that by the time it comes to the writing, they know what they want to say. They've started to shape an argument. It could also be, are we asking them to write too much? I think you can tell an awful lot from one sentence. And I think someone said before about sentence construction. Getting a kid to write one really good sentence is a really good objective for learning, to be able to learn something and then communicate that in a really clear sentence about what they've actually learned. I think sometimes we ask too much of children in too little time, saying, here's 10 minutes to write me 2 paragraphs. That's probably not achievable. So there's a few things to think about there. In terms of the other ideas out there, hopefully we can capture some of those within Christine's ideas. I think Christine wrote these in 1997 in a pamphlet called Analytical and Discursive Writing that she was asked to do for a history council for somebody. And it baffles me to think that I was like 6 in primary school whilst Christine was coming up with these ideas that I didn't even experience as part of my teacher training, and I wish I did, because it would have saved me a lot of pain. So here they are, with no further ado. This is a real key takeaway. It's got absolutely nothing to do with me. It's all Christine's work. So it's a really key my representation of Christine's work. This is a key takeaway from this session, hopefully. She argues that students struggle with memory and concentration. The idea that new information crowds out old information and ideas, and they have to hold all of this in their head. That's why I think a writing routine is really key. Get them to commit it to paper, get them to plan, get them to have some notes, so that, I can't remember was a great lecture recently. I think it's called outsourcing. If you outsource all the turmoil and chaos inside your head onto a piece of paper, or another way of saying it's note taking, you can support children with their memory and concentration so that they're not having to hold everything in their head and start writing at the same time. Outsource it onto a page, have a really clear writing routine. Number 2, and that's a really basic thing, it's not a cool template, it's nothing I can sell you, it's just sort of like have a planning process as part of a writing routine. Number 2, relevance and selection. This is so important. Students struggling to form a criteria of what to select and reject. What's relevant to the topic is quite hard. What's relevant to the question is really hard. And the hardest one is to think, what's relevant to the argument I'm trying to maintain? Probably we'd expect students later in their careers at high school to be answering those types of questions, but really we need to help students with relevance and selection. Sorting is one of my favorite ones, which is struggling to shape information into meaning. And I wonder whether this sort of goes back to the point that was made before about struggling to understand their own knowledge. Maybe that's about shaping. Maybe that's the kids not knowing how to take the information, the knowledge that they've got, and shape it and give it meaning. Because history requires categorization in terms of either something substantive like political or social, or we could be using our second order concepts or disciplinary concepts like cause or change. Because sorting is a tool of explicit conceptualization. It's specifically when we are starting to shape our argument, draw ideas, make sophisticated links. This one was made about small ideas and little ideas, so you get a gold star for that, whoever said that one. The general and the particular. So struggling to understand what a general point is versus a little idea that supports that. And for me, this is where that one is where I think teachers have been thinking about when they created writing frames. I think they've thought, right, I need them to make a point, have an example, and put some explanation into it, and then I need them to make a link or develop it, whatever. I think that's the closest one to why we have writing frames. Answers that lack this seem chaotic, seem all over the place, and you just write in the margin, go back to your writing frame or structure this better, whatever. And actually, it's because maybe we haven't structured organized the thinking rather than organize the writing. Outsource it through planning, but also get children to start to think carefully about what points are you going to make in your writing later on. Again, prioritizing thinking during the lesson and not get to the writing and then have to implement the writing frame. So the general in particular, I think it's already been mentioned, which is great. And the last one is quite a broad church, in my opinion, and I think it encompasses a lot, which is that language of discourse. If you're not familiar with the term discourse, it means like, on my view of it is like how you create an argument, how you marshal your argument. So students struggle with the confidence or understanding of how to sustain an argument, lacking the sentence starters, the connectives, or understanding how to actually analyze. I've chucked grammar in there. I put it in square boxes to show that I don't think Christine actually put grammar in there, although she obviously writes about grammar quite a lot throughout her work. So I'm not saying she's not thought of that one. But for me, I chuck grammar on there because some of my students really struggle with grammar and I want to help them with grammar. Okay, so we're thinking carefully about what students are struggling with. So that's a good step forward. So where did writing frames come from? And my first, this is being recorded, so I have to be careful what I say, but my first port of call, if I'm being dead honest, is Ofsted or the Department for Education or someone really far away from me that I can pin blame on because they're just easy to blame and makes me feel a little bit better. Whether they're to blame for it or not is a different question. But my first one was to just go straight to Department for Education, think, have they suggested this? Have Ofsted suggested this? And they didn't. So this is what is the research evidence on writing published by the Department for Education, but I think Ofsted did the research on it. And they suggested this like 2009. You should prioritize word, sentence, and paragraph level writing, vocabulary, and sentence construction skills. And this is 2009. In explicit and systematic instruction, direct instruction, scaffolding, and modeling, so that pupils learn specific strategies for writing and also how a person thinks, going back to Chris, how a person thinks and acts when planning, executing, and evaluating performance on a task and its outcomes. I think I tuned in or wired into the evidence-based direct instruction revolution in about 2015 with Making Every Lesson Count. But the Department for Education publishing before that about writing and saying all these things and not saying anything about writing frames. And this really does capture my approach to writing, thinking on the word level, the sentence level, which I'd never really thought about, and the paragraph level, sentence construction skills. And so important how a person thinks and acts when planning, executing, and evaluating the performance on the writing task. Massively important. So I actually used that for my chartered status when I did some research with the Chartered College. And I removed writing frames from the history classroom and just focused on words, sentences, and paragraphs level instruction, building sentences in the classroom. And although my methodology, looking back at it now, 5 years on, doing loads of reading or whatever it was a few years ago, my methodology wasn't as sound as it needs to be. And I definitely returned to my metrics for how I measured good historical writing. What I didn't find was any negative effect on the children at all in terms of their outcomes. I did see a dip in their confidence levels when I took their writing frames away, which is to be expected, but absolutely no dip in their attainment. And I mimicked the methodology of a woman, an English teacher called Louisa Enstone, and she actually used a control group, and she found that the control group and the test group that she saw removing the writing frame improved their writing. Now, the issue there is obviously it's English, it's not history, but for me, generally, I think a safe thing to say here is in the 2 times that this methodology and the studies being done in the classroom, there was no negative effect on the children's outcomes in terms of writing when writing frames were removed. Now, we might perceive their lack of confidence and think, right, well, this is all going wrong, I need to re-implement the writing frame. But taking them away didn't cause a massive issue. Okay, so then the next one was to think about the subject community. This book on the left-hand side is just absolutely, probably the best book out there for me in terms of history. And it is about literacy, but you'll learn so much about teaching history from this book. It's incredible. And this, I couldn't say it any better than this, and it's obviously Christine, so I'm going to put it on here. She said, not only did she say, she didn't say use writing frames. Instead, she said, on writing frames and so on, I felt strongly that these bypass the pivotal learning difficulty that is preeminently about historical learning. Writing frames, they can worsen the problem if they have the effect of deproblematizing the structure of the text the students are supposed to create. In a nutshell, if we over-scaffold and bypass the things the kids are struggling with during the writing process, we are actually bypassing the historical learning. And therefore that will worsen the problem if we're deproblematizing it for the children, instead of showing them how to tackle the historical difficulty. And although Christine, I think she wrote this in 2004, we have a modern day term for this that we use a lot in teaching, which is desirable difficulty. So I think it's Bjork, or it might be Robert Coe. It's one of those. It might be Bjork and Bjork. The couple of educational researchers suggest that we need desirable difficulties in our classroom. Children struggling is so important in our classrooms. We've got to get them to struggle. So long as that difficulty is one that will we know will help them make progress, we've got to put them into that sticky, tough, difficult stage instead of over scaffolding and bypassing that pivotal learning difficulty. Okay, so again, I'm going to try and give you some breathing room here because I'm probably tearing your heads off. This is a scenario. Alex isn't a real teacher, and let's be honest, most of this is from my own experience. We've sort of recognized that by now. This is a scenario. I'm going to give you a minute or so to maybe put in the chat what you think some of the red flags are here in Alex's. We'll assume Alex is an early careers teacher. Not that all early careers teachers have errors of thought, but typically when we're all in our early career, we do. So what errors of thought can we spot here in this scenario? I won't read it out. So have a quick read, drop in the chat a couple of ideas, some red flags that stick out to you.
Okay, I'm back to man the chat for John. So obviously give Alex, our mythical teacher, a quick read, and then in the chat, what issues have we got here?
Thank you, Harriet, for being on it on Twitter with the recommended reading. I can see it coming through on my phone.
Sorry. Okay.
No, I like it. Thank you. That's really good. Thank you very much.
So Gareth has said, if they are all succeeding, then they're not learning.
Come on. Yeah. Thank you. Love that.
Becky has said, basing it around a GCSE mark scheme. Obviously, our favourite thing to talk about as teachers, how much we love those GCSE mark schemes.
Yeah, good. Who was that? Sorry.
Becky.
Becky, Ofsted will love you. Well done, Becky. You've just passed your Ofsted inspection. I probably shouldn't say that because it's recorded. Obviously, an Ofsted inspection is way more complicated than that, and I'm tying myself up in knots. But yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about mark schemes.
Oh, Becky says she's done that the other week.
Oh, really? Well, there you go, Becky. Well done. We're getting Becky's perspective on getting through that. Well done. Okay, I'll chuck up some of the answers. Or is there anything more in the chat, Harriet?
There's nothing else more in the chat. Obviously, like I think it's already said, if they're all succeeding, I think obviously that's going to skew your data as well, isn't it? Like if they're doing an assessment and they all score these amazing grades and it comes to the mock or something and that writing frame is now gone, then obviously that's not going to give you a sort of clear reflection of where your students are.
Yeah, 100%. And just on that, I've not mentioned that as part of my training, but I don't know if any other HODs in here or anyone who's tried to track data, we tend to see these massive dips when we track data over 5 years. We have the dip in year 9 when we do a year 9 assessment and the data drops. And then we have typically like back into year 10 and year 11 and the data drops. And it's typically because, in my opinion, what I recognize in my department, we start to reduce the scaffolding and increase the rigor with which we moderate and assess the work. And therefore we see these dips in data in year 9 and in year 11. And one of the things that we spotted was that there are also the moments where we tried to remove scaffolds and the students' data dropped because previous assessments, we'd inflated their marks. And then in future assessments, their marks dipped because we'd remove scaffolds. So I think that's a really good point from Harriet, that it does skew your data. So I'll chuck these up. What Alex is doing here, he's been an absolute hero and he's firefighting like mad, and the man deserves a medal, but he is working so hard, he might be getting in the way of himself here, and I've definitely done that. So the first one to point out is in the first little few sentences, practicing how to structure essays ready for their assessment. Does writing essays improve essay writing? To some extent, but actually getting to the heart of sorting their ideas out into an argument, or really thinking carefully about what their general points are and what their supporting points are in the planning process, or creating a criteria in their minds that they can recall of how to select and reject information. So essay writing doesn't always improve essays, or writing essays doesn't always improve essay writing. Is this the right thing to be doing to improve their essays? When we see that Alex has asked them to glue the writing frame in the front of their books and the word bank and the success credit and all that type of stuff, particularly the writing frame, Has the scaffold become the schema? So this phrase means, has Alex's view of historical writing become limited by the writing frame? And he's thinking, this is the way to write in history. And if he hasn't thought that, has he really explicitly explained to the kids that that's not what a good history paragraph is? It's just one step. If you're really struggling, I'm going to give you this scaffold just for now, but we'll take it away because this isn't what a good history paragraph looks like. If it's glued in, does that mean that when the students don't need it anymore that they rip it out? Probably not, because you wouldn't want to mess your book up. But why is it being glued in? And if it's being glued in at the front of the book or the back of the book, which I've seen so many times before, are we suggesting that for the whole of year 8, that one writing frame suffice? What if it's a causal reasoning question for one inquiry and the next one's about evidential thinking where you're looking at source material? How does that one writing frame work for both of those two things? We've also got here that the teacher is carefully, it's Alex that's carefully constructing the writing frame to help the students, probably on their own, at home, in their classroom, and the kids have gone home. They're the ones doing all the thinking. They're the ones working out what the problems are and finding the way through them, not the kids. And if you're doing that before the lesson, naturally you have to do that to print it out and give it to the kids. Are they benefiting from you thinking aloud? Which is what we heard in the chat before. It's what the Department for Education suggested. You've got to think, if you're going to model, think out loud to the kids how to get them through the problem. Otherwise, it's like teach a man to fish, give a man a fish. You're only going to help them in that one instance and not more generally. We heard about the thing I was joking about with Ofsted before, about we shouldn't be using mark schemes in year 8. Mark schemes weren't designed for that. They're designed for examiners to be able to give raw marks, and we know how problematic they are even for experienced examiners. We shouldn't be using it as a way to develop historical writing at Key Stage 3. And then, as we mentioned in the chat before, it was great. If only 2 students are struggling and we're like halfway through the scheme of learning, it's either these kids are ready for their assessment now, or it's over scaffolded. So what's the point in doing it? There's no value there, because you're not going to learn anything about the kids' misconceptions or what they need to work on. Kids aren't going to learn too much from it because it's over scaffolded. So in this situation, and this is me like 5-6 years ago, something like that. This is where I was in my practice, and there's so many errors in the way that I was thinking, but I was working dead hard, really hard. Okay, so if not writing frames, then where do we get our answers from? Again, I'm just going to like big up the history community here. We've done so much hard work with curricular thinking, driven by people like Christine and others, and we've really engaged with scholars. I think the history teaching reading book club, whatever the thing is, led by Simon Beale, it's absolutely brilliant. It's teachers engaging directly with scholarship, and a lot of our curriculums have benefited from that. But has our understanding of historical writing benefited from re-engaging with the writing of scholars and historians? I don't know if we've used it quite as much for that. So I decided to try and do that. I wanted to look within the writing and see if I could spot any patterns of language. It's the one that I did for Teach Me Icons. Now, this isn't the only pattern of language you'll spot, but this is the one I got. So I just chose 20 pages at random from these 3 books, and one of the many different patterns that I spotted, and Jim Carroll's really good with spotting patterns within historical writing and how we teach them to children properly. One of the things I spotted with these adverbial openers are words that end in an ly, so you can call them an ly opener, that historians used to start some of their sentences. And I thought, what are these? And luckily my girlfriend's an English teacher, and I just said, Vic, what are these? She said, they're adverbial openers, or ly openers. And I thought, brilliant. So I said, well, kids already know these? She said, yeah, we use them in school. People call them different things, ly openers, whatever, but we use them in English. I thought, well, kids have already been taught them, brilliant. So I started to think carefully then, because some of these are style of substance. You wouldn't really encourage a kid maybe to start with darkly or regrettably or famously. Maybe if you're talking about significance with famously. But some of these aren't appropriate for the classroom. Why would we dedicate so much time to teaching these specific ones if they're just style? But some of them have got real substance, will really help. So if you think like ultimately, that's going to really help with drawing conclusions. generally, again, we're talking about broad points rather than small points, significantly supports us with our second order concepts. And so one of the things that really helps here is this idea of the word level strategy allowing the linguistic to release the conceptual. Now, if that's a familiar phrase to you, that's from James Woodcock in his work from Teaching History 179, I think. It was brilliant. It's one of my favorite articles. And it goes both ways. The concept releases the linguistics and the linguistics releases the conceptual. But on a basic level, it just means, are the words that we're choosing to teach children there to release an idea? Because if they're not, it's a cargo cult approach to teaching, where we nick all these cool words that historians have used. We ask kids, we tell kids to just use them in their work, and we just hope that it gets better. That's not it. Whilst we're looking within the work, if we can spot something that a historian is doing that we can use in the classroom to release an idea or a concept, we're getting closer to helping them write historically. So I chucked them all the ones I'd seen onto, I don't know if the placemat's here actually. No, it's not, I took it out. So onto a placemat. And there's a few of them that are really, really, I don't know why it's been deleted actually, some really useful ones. For me, things like politically, socially, economically, or regionally, locally, internationally, because those words allow analysis. If a child is looking at some reading and a break, we do it all the time, social, political, economic, that's great. It's sorting, it's the start of them making links and forming ideas. But if we just show them that you can put ly on the end of it, now they start to work out how to start a sentence. I need to make a point about Hitler's Germany, and I want to make a point about economics. Economically, in Hitler's Germany. So we can start to get them to sort of front load their sentences with analysis, give them a really clear focus of what they're doing. And when I've implemented this in the classroom, it really, really helped. And I'm going to show you an example of a resource where I've done it. It's dead basic. You don't have to make a display out of it. You don't have to put it onto a worksheet. You can just encourage children to use a few of these words each lesson and build them up and make sure you're really clear what concept, what idea is the use of this word releasing, just as a sort of safeguard from style over substance and like a cargo cult approach to developing historical writing. There are other things you'll spot, other patterns like historians use modal verbs. That's what English teachers call it. As history teachers, you may have heard it being called hedging, when you hedge your argument. Even if you've not heard that phrase before, you've definitely taught it. Kids can't get away with like intellectual arrogance in history. So you've got to say things like might, could, possibly, because we're not always exactly certain what happened in the past. And we say some historians may argue that X happened or Y happened or whatever. And degrees of uncertainty are really important in history. We can't always be certain of things that have happened. So you'll see these patterns of words within the historical scholarship. And for me, if we're reading them anyway, because we want to inform our curriculum, why can't we also use them to spot these patterns of language and then encourage children to use them? Not because we want them to be historians, but because by engaging with the work of historians, we can teach them to write better. Just a thought. Okay, so a really key moment here. This is like, there's the Christine Council bit where we took away the 5 things students struggle with in history, which was really useful, I think. This is another slide that I hope will help. I said at the beginning, I don't want to sell you an approach. Instead, I think guiding principles are a bit better, because it means that tomorrow or whenever you think about writing in future, you can look at your own practice, look within your own books, look at your own displays, look at your own resources, and ask yourself, are you supporting children to get better at writing? And if you have some guiding principles to keep coming back to, you're going to be able to evaluate, you're going to be a bit better at evaluating your own practice, instead of me saying, do this one strategy. So these are my 3, and you can come up with your own 3. You can nick these 3. You might think it needs to be 7, not 3. But for me, 3 is perfect. It really helped me. So I always ask myself, when I'm using a strategy to do with writing, does it pass through these 3 gates? The first one is, does the strategy provide coping mechanisms for the children? showing students how to tackle rather than avoid the difficulties of writing. We go back to Christine's work here from the analytical and discursive writing in that pamphlet, memory and concentration, relevance and selection, etc., etc. Am I helping them tackle these difficulties, or am I over scaffolding and then they are avoiding the difficulties? Number two, does the strategy link with the second order concepts and or ensure we are developing historical thinking? This goes back to that diagram I showed before about compartmentalized practice. Always prioritize what you actually want kids to be thinking about. Then build out from that, or build back from that. And the second order concepts are our frameworks of historical thought. They help us and help students organize the past. Are we directly teaching how to specifically think about causal reasoning or changing continuity or historical significance? Or are we just sort of doing a GCSE question, which sometimes link to the second order concepts, but maybe don't? Or are we just asking them to write a newspaper, which an English department would spend a full half term, five lessons a week, teaching kids how to write a newsletter or a newspaper, and we give them 10 minutes at the end of a lesson to write one? Why are we actually doing that? Are we prioritizing the historical thinking? Maybe there's definitely places I can think of where writing a newspaper would be worthwhile, but how long are we actually giving them? And what are we actually trying to get them? Are they using sources to be able to understand how people felt at the time? Maybe that's closer, but if we're just writing a newspaper to keep them busy for the last 15 minutes of the lesson, I'm not sure. And then the last one, thanks to James Woodcock, does your word level strategy or your vocabulary strategy allow the linguistic to release the conceptual? The words that we're providing to children, are they actually releasing ideas and prioritizing thought, or are they style over substance? Okay, so what we're going to do is now to see if some of my strategies, here's the placemat, pass through those three gates. And most of these are my strategies at the beginning, and I want people to be critical about them, because I definitely will be. But then I'm going to really clearly earmark where I'm using other people's ideas. And I'll be honest, I don't want people to criticize those ideas because I think they're brilliant. That's not that important what I think, but because they're not here to talk about them more generally. But I've used them as best practice, whereas my own practice, I think there's problematic aspects. Okay, so this is my adverbal placemat. It's something that I used with Teach Me Icons. I'm going to talk you through if it passes through those three gates. So does it help students start sentences with the clever sentence starters? So the language of discourse. Yeah, it does. So adverbial openers do support children to start sentences. Does it help them with sorting? Some of them do. Socially, religiously, politically, locally, nationally, internationally. Yeah, those do help with sorting. Do they help with the general and the particular? Maybe not directly. Do they help with memory and concentration? They do if they're embedded, if they're a mental model where kids know to analyze using local, regional, national, or political, economical, socially. Yeah, they would do that. But the problem with this is, and I've seen it used this way, if you print this out and give it to children and they just pick and mix the words into their writing without you carefully embedding it within your teaching, it's not going to improve their writing. It's going to improve their work. The work will look better. The style will be there. It'll look like they're writing like Frankopan. It'll look like they're writing like Halle Rubenhold. It'll look like they're writing like Katja Arman, but they're not actually doing it. Now, they're never going to be able to do that within high school because obviously those are amazing historians. But if we teach these directly and think, right, in this lesson, I'm going to teach these three adverbials and how you can use it, I think they will work. Whether they need to be on a placemat or not, I don't know. Maybe if you're going to use them, tick them off as you go so the kids can see these are the ones we've used so far. One person told me that's how they used it and I liked it. Could have it as a display board, but I actually think Hugh Richards' display board, which I'll show you later on, is better than this. But I think there are better ways to use these adverbials. So hopefully the next slide is that. Yeah, this might be a better way to use the adverbials. So these are my two really basic resources for the Norman Conquest, Anglo-Saxon England, one of my favourite topics, teach it in year 7, buzzing. And I try to get the kids to move through this unit, being able to have these as mental models. So in the future, after I've taught them Anglo-Saxon England, I want them to tell me that we can analyse on a national level, on a regional level, and on a local level. And I want them to question national narratives to see if they're accurate to a local context. And I want them to look at a local context and think, ask the question, was this happening nationally, or was this really specific to our local area? That's a really clear thinking process I'm encouraging my children to use. So I put these 3 adverbials on the screen, I colour code them, and I show them it on here. This is dual coding, not jumping on Noun Project and banging out a load of icons. I love Noun Project, I use it all the time, but this is where dual coding can go wrong, where we think it's all about icons and stuff like that. Icons can really help, they're incredible, but this is also dual coding. Putting images with words to release ideas or to support ideas. So I think this passes through the 3 gates better than that placemat did. On the left, every single history teacher and their dog has this as a template, saved somewhere, and it's a godsend of a resource. They bang it out, like print 40 copies off, happy days, that's period 1 sorted. Bit of reading, here we go. We've used it 1,000 times. But this tiny tweak of, instead of it saying political, economic, to politically, economically, religiously, socially, we can consequently, we can start to encourage children to see that they can make choices with words that allow them to start sentences. Now, one of the byproducts of doing this, kids love it, absolutely adore it. A couple of my teaching friends have implemented this, and really, I was really lucky to be part of that journey, and they sent me loads of work and they asked me to come and see it with their children. So I was really lucky, and the kids absolutely adore it. So the same things happen with them. They'll overuse it at first. They'll write you an essay with 28 adverbial openers, and you're going to have to say to them, listen, I'm buzzing that you've listened to me, but it's overkill. Every sentence can't start with an ly opener. But over time, they'll start to use it judiciously and use it well. But the key thing here is it's a simple strategy that really pushes the idea of what are they thinking about. So in my opinion, it passes through those 3 gates. Okay. So any writing revolution advocates in here are going to be like, oh my God, writing revolution. This is heavily influenced by that. There are some mistakes in here, in my opinion, some things that don't fit through my 3 gates, and this is one of my activities. So complete the level sentence focus below from the reading from today's lesson. Constructing fronted subordinates. I think it might be better to call those like temporal phrases because they're using time and helping kids with time. Hugh Richards tweeted recently, I asked him, could I mention this, how he was so buzzing about one kid that wrote a sentence like, by 10, I can't remember the exact sentence, by a date this had happened. It was such a simple sentence, but he was so happy with this kid because he'd showed them that type of sentence so many times in lesson, and he wanted them to be able to comment about time and chronology and how things change and what had happened by this point. And he was so happy with this really simple sentence. And that's really what I was trying to encourage with this. So there are things I like about it. I like in 1776, because actually starting children off with a date is really good. It's detail, it gives them a clear focus for the rest of that sentence. But after 51 years, I'm not sure now looking back at it, what that's helping kids to do. I remember there was something to do with John Hunter, and I wanted to encourage the idea that he'd been doing it for a really long time, but I'm not sure whether that actually passes through my 3 gates. I hadn't actually thought about it carefully. Constructed noun positives. I love noun positives because it allows kids to write one sentence where they include 2 facts or 2 details. So in 1776, John Hunter, who cut his teeth as a surgeon in the army, was appointed surgeon to King George III. The kids are expected to add an extra detail about John Hunter, and it's a bit of retrieval practice, and also practicing writing sentences. So I like the noun positives, and it's a very writing revolution thing. Number 3 then is the adverbial openers. So one that I pinned my hat on a little bit, and I think it's the thing people know me for now. Significantly, great, I like it. I would push you to read the work of Christine Counsel about what significance actually means as a second order concept, but I like the word significantly as a sentence starter. Unfortunately, I think is a bit unfortunate. Looking back, I'm not sure I should be teaching children that. I'm not sure it unlocks an idea. And I think it gets into a little bit of like value judgment. I was trying to link to the reading where it's like, unfortunately, John Hunter didn't realize he had both of these two diseases, and therefore it slowed the progress of his work. Whatever. That's what I was trying to get them to do. But did I need it to be unfortunately? Probably not. Style over substance. Okay, so this is my clear marker. Most things past this are the work of valued colleagues, not that I've worked closely with them, but people that I've admired from afar. So I'm not going to criticize these. I think they're excellent. So notice here that Hough has probably done his reading, because it doesn't say writing like a historian. It says how to improve your writing in history. This is like the most downloaded resource. I think he said like a few thousand downloads. It's brilliant. This is a great example of using icons to support children to understand words, the linguistic releasing the conceptual. You can see here that it's unlocking historical thinking. Thinking is at the heart of what he was trying to encourage, and he was giving them the words to think, which is brilliant. And he's gone one step even better than that placement I was talking about that can be quite problematic, because he started to categorize it into some of the second order concepts, some of the ways that you would use it. Some of them you'll see are adverbial openers. So like admittedly he's got on there. I'm trying to look if there's any others. Consequently is on there, and easily you could change suddenly, rapidly, steadily, slowly. You could easily show kids how to use those words, turn into an LY opener, and comment on the pace of change. But this is very, very good in my opinion. It's free to download. It would definitely be better than that burger that I used to have as an MQT, in my opinion. This one, you'll probably all use this. Really interesting to note that I think a few people have been commenting recently that you can't just use meanwhile elsewhere as your only way to have a diverse curriculum with global stories. You've got to also do that in your actual lessons, and we can use this for homeworks as well. But I absolutely love the work of Richard Kennett. I should have tagged Richard, actually. I really apologise, Richard, if you've seen this. Richard Kennett and Will Bailey Watson. Loads of people saw this and thought, I'm going to use it for homework, and it's going to really help me widen the scope of my curriculum. Obviously, I used it for that too, but when I first saw it, I thought, oh my God, how good is that sentence starter? Meanwhile, elsewhere. Now, I'd love them to be more specific and say, meanwhile in the Byzantine Empire. But the meanwhile elsewhere as a concept is absolutely brilliant. And it's one you will find throughout most historical scholarship out there. You will see sentences where historians shift their focus to something happening concurrently elsewhere in the world, to comment on, or elsewhere in the country, to comment on what was happening elsewhere. And meanwhile is brilliant. Please teach children to use this. Please use these strategies. They're free, they're online. The lads have smashed it, and they've written an article in Teaching History about how they've harnessed the subject community to really drive meanwhile elsewhere. It's brilliant. But when I first saw it, I thought it's a really cool sentence starter that's going to release an idea for the children. They're going to see that they should comment on what's happening in two different places at the same time. It's similarity and difference as our second order concept. So I absolutely love it. Okay, so let me quickly check the time. I've got 15 minutes. What I want to do now is, after blowing your heads off or really mincing up a lot of explanations and making it more complicated than it actually is, I want to give you some little strategies just to leave with, so that you can try them out tomorrow. I know we all love a practical strategy, so this is my bit where I'm just going to throw some ideas at you for the last 15 minutes. Hopefully, so far, you've taken a few key things away from that. But just as a recap, I think Christine Counsel's 5 things students struggle with when writing historically is integral to the way we should perceive how to support children. I think instead of thinking of our one-way approach of teaching writing, we should create within our departments or within our practice guiding principles that we want to adhere to, that keep us honest and keep us reflective, so that we can evaluate our own work and make it better. And And there's lots of things out there in the subject community that we've just seen that you can literally use, and I think will really help. So this one, I love a Freya model for a very specific thing in my classroom. You've probably all heard the Freya model before. The thing I like it for is I make a template like this. I print off like 200 of them, quite small, not A4. I think it's too big. I can usually get 3 to 1 side of A4, print off a few hundred copies, guillotine them up, and I have them at the back of the room. And if I've ever overestimated how much students understand about a word or a concept, and I realise there's a hole or a gap there, I quickly go to the back of the room, whiz these out around the room to be responsive to what I've seen, and we deal with that there and then. I don't tend to use them. If I've got time to plan how I'm going to engage with the concept, I don't tend to use a Freya model. Instead, I use this. Now, this is really wishy-washy, and I apologise already. Ramble 14 is a really valued colleague of mine called Ailsa Fiddler. She's absolutely brilliant primary colleague that's done a massive amount to shape my thinking. She showed me this. She thinks that Christine showed it to her in a CPD session, couldn't put a finger on where it was. So I think this is Christine's work. Ailsa introduced it to me, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. The idea is that sometimes we give children a general definition of a word or a concept before they engage with specific examples of it. And I think it's Christine that argues that the specific sits before the general, that for children to come up with a general definition, a workable definition to use in future, they've got to engage with specific examples first. So the concept here is monarchy, and I could have easily put monarchy in the middle of this Freya model, but if I've got time to think about it, I love what Ailsa and I think Christine suggest here. Give them 6, it's here, 6 concepts or examples of a concept, and get them to engage with the conversation about them. So all of these are women, but monarchs can also be men. We have a monarch, well, it's really sad actually when Ailsa showed me this, Queen Elizabeth was still alive. Obviously she's not with us anymore. The monarch at the time that we all know and love, Queen Elizabeth, she is a monarch when she's got a crown on, but also when she's not got a crown on. She was older when we knew her, but she was a monarch when she was younger, so it's not about age. She's Elizabeth II because there was an Elizabeth I, so England's had a monarchy for a long time. But there are monarchs in other countries too, like Egypt, and monarchs are also in fiction, like the Queen of Hearts that they may have read at primary school. The idea is once they've had this discussion, they now write a general definition based on these 6 specific examples that you provided. And what I found is that their application of that concept going forward is much better for the fact they've engaged with specific examples than when I give them, I mean, I've not given a dictionary definition for a long time, but when I try to give them a general definition and then expect them to apply it in specific ways in the future. I think this works better if you've got time to plan. If you've not and you need to be responsive, I'd love a blank Freya model to whip out in the lesson. And I've put Mike Hill on there as well, because this really chimed for me with a CPD session he did for the HA on generative questioning. And we've not got time to go through it too much now, but I wish it was out there. It probably is. You need to watch it if you can get it for free, or if you pay for it, it's brilliant. The idea is that children need the building blocks to be able to think hard about something. And for me, this strategy gets them to think hard about the concept of monarchy, but they don't give up because you've given them the 6 building blocks they'll need to start to think carefully about what monarchy actually means, or the start of a definition. So if you've got time, I like the one on the right. If you've not got time, you need to be responsive. A blank Freya model goes a long way. I love using sentences as retrieval practice. I think the retrieval practice revolution has encouraged us to use quizzes an awful lot, or like retrieval grids or whatever, and I think they've got a really important place, but there are other ways for students to retrieve their learning, not just in starters. And I think some of the things I've shown you today, like from the Writing Revolution, you can use. And the research here from Writing Revolution, Make It Stick, is that the researchers found the same effect. When you ask children to write about what they've learned, it has the same effect of quizzing them about what they've learned. So writing one really good sentence on a whiteboard, holding it up about their learning, and you know, to see all those different sentences, pick one or pick two and compare them with the kids, discuss those sentences, discuss misconceptions, spot any errors with grammar or anything like that. I think it's really valuable and should be used alongside some of the very popular forms of retrieval practice at the minute. I love this. I use this to encourage children to see that even within a sentence, children need to make choices within the sentence, not at just the start of the sentence, but within the sentence. And I think the so, but, and way is really great. I've seen people use the word because in here. Really interesting. Not got time to go through it now, but Jim Carroll pointed this out in his writing and it blew my head off. And I literally snatched the history book off the shelf and tried to find the word. He said, how often do you see historians use the word because? Like a word that I teach every single day to do with explanation. It's very rare. I can't remember exactly how he explains it, but for me, it's probably because ends up being quite a monocausal link. It's like this happened and it led to this because this, and historians don't usually use it that much. So I got rid of the word because, and I think I put the word and in, or so. But what it does is encourages kids to make choices in the middle of the sentence, not just at the start of the sentence. And it's also a good bit of retrieval as well. They're going to say three things. This I pointed out before. Rachel Ball has used this brilliantly as a do now task. Please read her blogs. Remember, this thing on the screen is not an example of perfect practice. There are errors in here, like after 51 years, and unfortunately. Greg Thornton has done a lot of work on the writing revolution in the classroom too. And Josh Valance has also, he mapped, I don't know if his thinking has changed since, because he's done a lot of excellent work on curriculum design, but he mapped some of the writing revolution guidance against his own curriculum to try and make sure children were developing their writing over time. So look out for those people and maybe use sentences like this in the classroom as part of your retrieval. I think if you need the structure of a scaffold, like a writing frame, but agree with me today that writing frames that have like an acronym with them, like PEE or TEAL or PETAL or whatever, if you agree with me but still want a writing frame, I think the single paragraph outline is really great. It's a Hockman strategy from Writing Rev. I really hope I'm not suggesting another problematic writing frame to replace problematic writing frames. But for me, this one is less problematic because every paragraph, unless you're going really like writing a one-word paragraph, whatever, that you use in English language to get high marks in a creative writing piece, in most discursive writing, a paragraph is an opening sentence, a closing sentence, and ideas throughout that support those ideas. So you can't really argue with that too much. We can use this with children, and for me, it's part of that writing routine I talked about before. If my kids can't pick up the pen, I write a plan with them. Right, guys, how are we going to start this sentence? Let's open up a conversation. Ryan, tell me how we could start this sentence. Right, let's write that down together. You don't have to use this, guys. It's just there if you're struggling. Right, what supporting ideas are we going to use to back that up? Thinking about Christine's work before, general and the particular. These are the smaller ideas that back that up. Right, how are we going to close this sentence out? And I think someone mentioned before about Gareth maybe using Peel. You'll still get the L of this, which is linking back, but without it being an acronym. And it's also so versatile. You can give them write the first sentence with them, let them start, write the first sentence and the last sentence, write the whole thing with them and model it, think out loud, like Chris said before. It's so versatile. And the best thing about it is it's so easy to stop using. You literally just stop using it. You don't have to rip it out the books. You don't have to come up with a more complicated writing frame. When the children don't need it anymore, you just stop using it. This used alongside coping mechanisms like use the words in the question. A great way to start a second sentence is, for example, when you think you've made your point, say furthermore and try and include a second idea. If you feel like you're a million miles away from your first sentence, use the word therefore to bring it back. Instead of using I, why don't you put some historians would argue? These are little coping mechanisms I'm constantly saying out loud when I'm modeling under the visualizer with a piece of paper. Again, Does it need to be a template that you print out? Maybe if you want to lock down part of your practice, but maybe not if actually a visualizer and a piece of paper will do. I think we don't need to have as many PowerPoints as part of the writing process. This one, I'm not even going to start trying to tell you about card sorts, because Johnny on Twitter, please read his blog on card sorts. It's absolutely incredible. I think if kids are struggling to pick up the pen, going back to a diagram or a card sort that shapes the student's thinking goes a long way. I think it's an integral part of the lesson. I fell out with card sorts and fell back in love with them, and then read Johnny's blog and became obsessed with them. I know they're a bit of a faff and they take guillotine and cutting out whatever. They're so worth it if you've read Johnny's blog, so please read that. But if you're trying to get students to write a paragraph, make sure you get the card sort, diagram, shaping, sorting, arranging part of your lesson right. If that goes well, it will really create momentum that you can capitalize on in your writing section of your lesson, typically at the end. Okay, so you'll be glad to know, guys, we're there. It's really late at night, and thank you for your concentration so far and your time. So if key takeaways, formulate writing frames like the PEE variety and all the others. Don't necessarily make writing better, but maybe making writing easier, meaning students avoid rather than tackle the difficulties of forming an argument and communicating it clearly and accurately. The single paragraph outline could, big could, provide a useful scaffold, allowing students to develop coping mechanisms for common difficulties whilst developing historical thinking. Remember, I really hope I'm not suggesting picking up one problematic writing frame to replace other problematic writing frames. But for me, the single paragraph outline doesn't suffer from some of the issues that the other writing frames do. Planning lessons in terms of thinking, reading, speaking, writing, not in that order, might help us. It definitely helped me see the lesson as a formative process, see writing as a formative process. Thinking about writing instruction through words, sentence, and paragraphs might help support students incrementally. So that was me, that benefited me and my team moving away from the compartmentalized lesson planning of it's got to have a work object at the end of every section and it's got to follow this section because that's what the school use, and it's all that type of stuff just got in the way of what I was trying to do. Prioritize the thinking. What reading do they need to engage with to like inspire that thinking? What high quality discussion can you structure so that you get to the heart of what they understand and don't understand, the misconceptions? And then in the writing process, prioritize the thinking. Get the kids to think carefully, then communicate it into writing. And then whilst writing, you should also support them to see that writing is a formative process. They will start to shape some of their ideas as they try to commit it to sentences and words. And I think the single paragraph outline can help with that if you've got kids that struggle to pick up the pen. I think writing routines also help. Finally, retrieval writing is a form of retrieval practice that we've seen through evidence has similar effects of like popular fashionable retrieval practice that reacquaints thinking and writing, and great sentences are the building blocks of great paragraphs. I should have put in my opinion there. I think great sentences are the building blocks of great paragraphs. And ask yourself the question, how much am I actually asking them to write? If there's 10 minutes left of the lesson or 20 minutes, how much are you actually asking them to write? Because you need to structure it with them, assess it, help them, give them feedback, all those things. I think it's Mary Mayat that encourages us with lots of things in education to do fewer things in greater depth. And I think we can definitely apply that phrase to writing. And just on time, guys. It's very rare that I finish on time. That's me done. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you ever so much, John, for your talk. And we've had some thanks coming in the chat already about how people have really enjoyed your thoughts about how to sort of make students getting them better, sorry, get my words twisted there, getting them better writing at history. If you have got any questions for John, now is a good time to post them into the chat.
It is. I'd love to answer any questions, guys, if if anyone's got any questions.
Harriet, can I just ask? Sorry, it's Sam
Hello,
from
Sam.
Beyond. I arrived late because I had lots of internet problems and the universe has conspired against me. But I caught the end of that, John, and I mean, it just sounded absolutely fantastic. I'm conscious that there might be people on this call today who really are inspired by what you've spoken about. I know I have been the short bit that I managed to catch, but might be nervous about kind of stripping back from whatever writing frames they're using or however they're approaching writing at the moment. And obviously you've kind of gone through that process. So what was that like for you? How did you kind of overcome any anxiety or nerves that you had? And then what was your experience, I guess, of applying that?
Yeah, so it's a scary process to remove writing frames. There's such a crutch. That's actually, I think, part of the issue is, I think it's not just students that struggle to remove them. I think it's teachers too. I think what I did realize was when I was supporting colleagues early on in their careers, I think writing frames can help them whilst they're trying to lock down other areas of their practice, to have something locked in they can use, that they know they can use as support. I think that's the one area I have seen where I think writing frames really early on in your career, when you're struggling with behavior management or all the thousands of things we do in the classroom. It's a scary process because the students struggle, and that's good. We can take Christine's words on this. Struggle is good. So many people tell it to us, but it's so hard when you're actually in the classroom to see kids struggle. I think Christine's, one of her favorite phrases, hold the line, or like try not to step in too much. That's why I love the single paragraph outline, because for me, you can take your current writing frame out, bring the single paragraph outline in, and it provides a lot of the support writing frames offer. And in my opinion, doesn't fall foul of some of the things I've talked about before, like the scaffold becoming the schema, or trying to force one writing frame on every type of historical thinking. Like evidential thinking is quite different to causal reasoning. And if you've got the same writing frame, that's problematic. But because the single paragraph outline is so broad, it's so loose and responsive, it won't straitjacket the historical thought there. So if I was a head of department trying to support a trainee, I'd think very, very carefully about it, because it might offer the guidance they might need a printed out template, the single paragraph outline. It's a scary process for you and for the kids, but be buoyed or be confident for the fact that people like Christine, people like myself, although I should not be put in the same category, have been through it, and the fact they are struggling is the point. If they're struggling with it, they're more likely to make progress. Obviously, if they're completely giving up and it's desperate, we need to up the scaffolding. And I think that's where the single paragraph outline helps. I think if you write great sentences through retrieval practice sentences, then you can do some of that work with the kids, and also reduce your expectations of the amount they write to be able to maintain your expectations of the quality of their writing. Like I said, Hugh Richards, who's, in my opinion, a brilliant history teacher, was buzzing over one sentence. It was within a paragraph, but he was buzzing about this one sentence. So yeah, hold the line, to quote Christine, don't overhelp them. If they're struggling, that's good. Normalize it with them. Get a visualizer. If you're expecting them to write it on a piece of paper, try and show it to them on a piece of paper, in my opinion. Visualizers changed my practice because, and I suppose all the teachers will think about, I can't remember what they were called, the like overhead project, can't think, when you've got like the vinyl acetate, and my teachers used to write.
Yeah, OHPs, overhead projectors. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, they were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I think interactive whiteboards, which are really interesting because they're not that interactive, they may have got in the way of that, and we've had a return with the visualizers. So basic advice, the single paragraph outline might be less problematic than your current writing frame. Retrieval practice sentences can really help embed writing practices with children. Think carefully about what thoughts you want the kids to have. Then they won't, at least when they're not picking their pen up, you know it's not that they haven't got fully formed ideas, it's that there's something else wrong there. I would implement a writing routine, so have it really clear what you do, remind them of the question, remind them where their support is, show them a model, give them the vocabulary they need, etc., etc. And then reach out. Use my Twitter handle, tell me all your struggles, reach out to Christine. She's always on Twitter helping people out, giving them advice. Everyone will help. This community will help. So put your struggles out on Twitter and just have a go, and we'll see if we can help.
I've just put John's Twitter handle in the chat. I think Helen was asking for it. I don't believe that there are any more questions. So I think that's everything, isn't it, John?
Yeah, definitely from me. And thank you so much, guys. It's so late and you've dedicated so much time to it. So thank you. Please tweet me about anything that you're doing, even if none of it works and it all goes wrong and you want to tell me I'm wrong. That's really valuable too. Please let me know, and reach out to people if you're struggling with anything.
Okay then, so it's definitely goodbye from me, and I think Sam, are you still there?
Yeah, still here. Thanks so much, and sorry I was late.
No problem.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, guys. See you later.
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Cheers.